Yes, I am a die-hard Mizzou fan, and Mizzou beat Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl, but no matter what pair of eyes was watching that bowl game, everyone knew that Ohio State's quarterback situation was a disaster. Devin Brown didn't look comfortable to begin with, and obviously Lincoln Kienholz was nowhere near ready. The reason those two had to play was because Kyle McCord transferred away. While he did unfairly take a lot of heat, I don't think McCord was quite at the level to play at Ohio State, and while I think he'll do fine at Syracuse, there was really nothing special about him. He's a good to above average quarterback who in the right system could become a star. I feel like that's what most Ohio State fans thought of Kyle McCord. The new quarterback they just brought in the portal feels very similar to him. His name is Will Howard. Will Howard has started on and off the last 4 years at Kansas State, is likely a fringe NFL quarterback, and has led Kansas State to a lot of success. He's obviously a really good player and was really hyped up in the portal, but in my opinion, this is the most confusing transfer quarterback of the 2024 cycle. I don't understand what Ohio State is trying to accomplish here, but in today's video, we're going to talk about it all. For all you Ohio State fans, you're going to hear the story of Will Howard, his recruitment, his K-State career, and how he got to this point, and then we're going to talk about why it's a confusing fit for him at Ohio State, and what I ultimately think will happen. But before we get started, if you're a big college football fan, be sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like if you want to support today's video, subscribe if you're new and love college football content, and let me know what player, team, topic, or situation I could cover next. Also, be sure to follow me on Instagram, and let me know what transfer or player I should cover next, what you think of the Ohio State quarterback situation, and just talk college football with me. I want to connect with you guys more, and now without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with the video about the most confusing quarterback in this year's transfer cycle, Will Howard. So in order to understand how Will Howard has got to this point, we first need to go back in time. He grew up in the state of Pennsylvania, and Will loved football from a young age, and more specifically was a die-hard Philadelphia Eagles fan. He apparently started playing flag football at 6 years old, and eventually settled on the quarterback position. He'd go to Downington West High School, and apparently would become the starting quarterback as a sophomore, and then saw a ton of success the first half of his junior year before he got hurt and would have to miss some time. As a senior, Howard would have an insane season as he threw for 2,543 yards and 27 touchdowns. He also led them to their first championship in school history and had a school record 13 wins for them. To go alongside that, he was also a star basketball player and would eclipse nearly 1,000 points in his career, and this would only help him be better on the football field. He eventually would start to get a ton of offers, but he'd have to go through an interesting predicament. He said, quote, "A big part of it for me was the Power 5 versus the Ivy. I had some of the best schools in the country and some of the best football schools in the country, and I was like, what do I want more?" Well, Will would end up going the Power 5 route, as he said, quote, "It just came down to growing up. I always watched the big games, and I wanted to be in that big atmosphere. It was sort of my dream." Howard liked a lot of the schools that were pursuing him. He'd have to actually do the dirty work to get his favorite school to talk to him. He said, quote, "I got in contact with Kansas State offensive line coach Connor Riley. He had followed me on Twitter, and I sent him a direct message of my film, and he ended up responding, and 2 days later, I got an offer. You might be intrigued by this situation," and Howard offered an explanation for this. He said, quote, "I reached out to Riley because they don't really look at kids from where I'm from. They don't have an area recruiter for us, and I knew they were kind of looking for quarterbacks and all that. That's part of the recruiting process, and you just have to be proactive, so I sent my film out there." Kansas State, Kansas, and Maryland seemed to be the early favorites for Will, but he took a ton of visits and trips trying to soak the experience up and take advantage of opportunities other people would only dream of. But quarterback recruiting goes quick, and some factors are out of your control. It seemed that the brother of another big-time Big 12 quarterback would have an impact on where Howard would go, and that was Chuba Purdy. When Howard ended up making his decision, he picked Kansas State, and this happened right after Purdy chose Louisville. He became well aware that opportunities for quarterbacks would start to disappear, and a lot of the schools he was talking to were waiting to hear where Purdy would go. Chuba would since go to Florida State and is now at Nebraska. Will Howard ended up having other Power 5 offers, including Maryland, Rutgers, Kansas, and Minnesota, and while KU canceled his visit, there was a lot of buzz at one point suggesting that the Terrapins were in the lead for his recruitment. The thought was, just before Howard took his official visit to K-State, that he actually silently committed to head coach Mike Locksley and the Terrapins. But nope, that did not end up happening, as Manhattan would be his new home, and Coach Kleiman and Colin Klein got the job done for the Wildcats. Why Kansas State? He said, quote, "Honestly, it was the people that made the difference. The coaches, the fans, the players, and everyone in the town of Manhattan were so genuine and nice. I really feel at home there. Other than being far away, there weren't really any things about K-State that I didn't love. I know that they will push me, but also look out for me and support me, and I'm really confident in my choice." He was a great quarterback with great grades, as he apparently had a 4.3 GPA, and on the field, he had a cannon for an arm and maturity beyond his years. That's why so many schools wanted him, but K-State won the sweepstakes, and he saw himself similar to a former number 1 overall pick. As I said earlier, he was a huge Philadelphia Eagles fan, and he saw what Coach Kleiman did with Carson Wentz. He said, quote, "I feel like I'm a player that is similar type to him, and I'm really looking forward to playing in the same offensive system that he did. Obviously, it's cool to say that I'm playing for his coaches and hear old stories about him from Coach Kleiman." Despite being pursued by a lot of big schools, 24/7 Sports wasn't as high on Howard as you think. According to them, he was only a 3-star player, the number 33 pro-style quarterback, and the 888th best player in the class of 2020. So how would the Pennsylvania product end up doing in the Little Apple? Getting into his Kansas State career, Howard was expected to eventually see the field, but not right away. As a freshman, he'd actually get a chance to start the last 7 games after Skylar Thompson would suffer a season-ending injury. Because of this, he'd make history as he was the first true freshman quarterback to start since 2006, and they'd actually get the win over TCU. He said, quote, "We got the win, and that's all that matters to me. I'm happy as heck that we won the game, but there's a lot to clean up." Unfortunately, with every high, there's a low, and the Wildcats would finish the season with 5 straight losses. He did start the final 7 games of the 2020 season, throwing for 1,200 yards, 8 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. Wasn't great numbers, but he was pretty young, and there was obvious potential there. But his struggles really started to get to him. He said at one point, "As much as you try to block it out, you still hear it. It's still kind of in the back of my head, and that is definitely one of my motivators to prove people wrong. I feel like we've made some good strides in doing that, and I've made some good strides in doing that, and there's a lot of work to do." In 2021, Howard would end up appearing in 5 games, throwing for 332 yards with a touchdown and a pick, and he also had 4 scores on the ground. It was solid for a backup. Going into 2022, Skylar Thompson had been drafted into the NFL, but instead of riding with Howard, they decided to bring in transfer quarterback Adrian Martinez. A lot of players probably would have transferred in that scenario, but not Howard. Unfortunately for Martinez, he'd get hurt, but luckily for Will, he'd get a chance to play. Howard would end up appearing in 5 regular season games and had really good numbers. He had 2 touchdowns in their loss to TCU, and then had 296 yards and 4 touchdowns in a 48-0 shutout over Oklahoma State. The Cowboys were ranked number 9 in the country. Howard would take over for the next few games, throwing for 3 touchdowns in a win over Baylor, had 3 touchdowns in a win over West Virginia, and then 2 touchdowns in their rivalry win over Kansas. Howard had now led them to 4 straight victories and would get a chance to start in the Big 12 championship. Against number 3 TCU, he got revenge as he combined for 3 scores, and they won 31-28 in overtime. All in all, in 2022, Will Howard threw for 1,600 yards with 15 touchdowns and 4 picks. It was pretty middle of the pack, but there was a lot of hype for him going into 2023. In week 1, they'd play against SEMO, and in week 2, he'd have 5 touchdowns and a win over Troy. Howard was off to a terrific start, and his biggest test would come in week 3 on the road against Missouri. This was a former Big 12 game, and in a game that I was personally at, Will Howard got beat up. Unfortunately, he looked like he could barely move at the end and couldn't get K-State down the field, which allowed Mizzou an opportunity to kick a 60-yard field goal and win the game. It was a blunder to Howard, but his worst was yet to come. He threw an interception without a touchdown against UCF, and then threw for 3 picks in a horrible loss to Oklahoma State. At that point, many were calling for him to be benched, and it sort of happened. Against Texas Tech, I guess apparently the Red Raiders were allowing them to run the ball a lot, so Chris Kleiman put in the backup Avery Johnson, and he ran for 5 touchdowns. From this point on, the K-State fan base was ready to run Will Howard out of town and make Avery Johnson the savior. Except, that's not what would happen, and Will Howard would be back and finish the season off strong. He threw 3 touchdowns in a win over TCU, had 2 touchdowns in a blanking of Houston, put up 4 touchdowns in a near win over Texas, and then finished the year with 4 touchdowns against Baylor, 3 touchdowns in a win over number 25 Kansas, and nearly 300 yards and 2 touchdowns in a close loss to Iowa State. Howard had a terrific finish to the season, and after the fans wanted him benched after 3 different games, he put up 2,600 yards with 24 touchdowns and 10 picks, with 9 more scores on the ground. This made Howard one of the better quarterbacks in the country, and many were expecting for K-State to be back in 2024, and he could have a big year and play his way into the NFL draft. Except, he decided to enter the transfer portal. For a while, it looked like he would go to USC, but after Miller Moss went off in the bowl game, they had their guy. After that, there were some weird rumors that he'd go to Ohio State, but surely people were just joking around with that. No, they were dead serious. Will Howard would end up transferring to Ohio State, and this would sort of shock the college football world. Why did he go to Ohio State? Well, he said, quote, "I really just wanted to go somewhere where I could elevate my draft stock and compete for a national championship. Everything at Ohio State just made sense and lined up." While I obviously won't deny that he'll have a chance to improve his stock and win a national championship, is Will Howard the guy that Ohio State fans want? I honestly don't know. Besides Justin Fields, Ohio State's not really been a place where quarterbacks go to transfer. They usually come in highly regarded, sit for a year or two, and then eventually play. This definitely feels off par for Ryan Day, but this actually could be the answer to their problem. In total, he has nearly 6,000 yards and 48 touchdowns to his name, and despite multiple injuries and being in a system that's not known for putting up huge stats, Will Howard has excelled. He also has great athleticism, will have extremely good weapons around him, hopefully a good offensive line, and he may have a ton of help with both Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson in the backfield, if he decides to stay. While many think that Will Howard will just be a little bit better version of McCord, I actually think he could be really good. I think the Ohio State staff is going to put him in a perfect position to utilize his skill set, and with his experience and his potential, I do think that he could be a big-time quarterback for Ohio State. The only reason it doesn't really make sense is because it's something that Ohio State hasn't typically done. He did have somewhat mediocre stats, and now many believe they're probably giving up on Devin Brown. Personally, I think he'll probably transfer away, but I think Lincoln Kienholz showed he was not ready, and there's no way that Aaron Nolan will start right away. So for right now, it's not the worst idea to bring in a one-year rental who has a lot of upside, a lot of experience, and potential. All in all, while it may feel like a Kyle McCord 2.0, I think it's actually going to pay off, and while it is the most confusing transfer quarterback in the country, I think it'll end up working out. But what do you guys think? If you're an Ohio State fan, what do you think of the move? What do you think of the quarterback situation? And what do you think of Will Howard? Be sure to let me know down below. Let me know what quarterback I should take a look at next. Follow me on Instagram and check out all my other videos on the end screen. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.